In the shadowy crevices of West Virginia, there dwells a monster, an eldritch being, a bringer of tragedy. Eyewitness accounts describe it as a tall figure, a harbinger of doom with glowing red eyes, hauntingly pale skin, and towering 10-foot wings. The creature's name is Mothman. While the legend of Mothman stretches far and wide, permeating pop culture and even having a festival, the first sightings of the creature were in the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, on November 15, 1966. Two young couples reported a grotesquely pale creature, one with glowing red eyes that was startled by their car headlights and chased them back into town before vanishing. This would be the end of Mothman's story had the sightings not been followed by a tragedy that resulted in 46 deaths and dozens of more sightings. But what exactly is Mothman? Is it a supernatural monster and a harbinger of doom? Is it a man, a mutated creature, or simply a case of mistaken identity? Howdy folks, my name is Speaker 4 and welcome to the Legend of Mothman, Monster or Mistaken Identity. To understand what Mothman is, we need to dive into the eyewitness accounts of the first people to see the creature, as well as examine the mythos that surrounds it. The creature in question was by all accounts a spectacle to behold, a pale, towering figure with wings that stretched into the sky, and its eyes by all accounts burned with an eerie, crimson light. It sounds like a creature out of a story. And for us, that story starts on November 15th, 1966, with two young couples from Point Pleasant out on a drive near the TNT area, the site of an abandoned former World War II munitions plant. The couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were together in their car about 8 miles north of town when they spotted something strange in the fields near midnight. It was a creature, the creature that would eventually become known as Mothman. Linda Scarberry described it as a slender, muscular man, about 7 feet tall with white wings, and said that she was unable to discern its face due to the hypnotic effect of its glowing eyes. When the couple shone a light on the creature haunting them, its eyes glowed an eerie red and it seemed to be afraid of the light because it began chasing them, likely in an attempt to scare them off. According to the couples, it was extremely fast, flying at nearly 100 miles an hour after their car, but was reportedly a clumsy runner. "I'm a hard guy to scare," Scarberry said, "but last night I was for getting out of there." Distressed, the witnesses drove away at high speed and said that the creature flew after their car, making a screeching sound. It pursued them as far as the Point Pleasant city limits. "We went downtown, turned around, and went back, and there it was again," Millette said. "It seemed to be waiting on us." He said that the light gray creature then scurried away through a field. When pressed for further description, the couples described the creature as a man with wings, but that the head was not an outstanding characteristic. They said it didn't resemble a bat in any way, but maybe what you would visualize as an angel. "This doesn't have any explanation to it," Millette said. "It was an animal, but nothing like I've seen before." According to him, it seemed to fly unlike anything they'd seen, flying silently with nearly vertical takeoff. "If I had seen it myself, I wouldn't have said anything," Scarberry commented, "but there were 4 of us who saw it." Sheriff's deputies and city police went to the scene at about 2 o'clock in the morning, but were unable to spot anything. One deputy, Millard Halstead, said that he had seen dust in the vicinity of a coal field that could have been caused by the bird, but no solid evidence was found. During the next few days, other people reported similar sightings after local newspapers reported on it. 2 volunteer firemen who saw it said it was a large bird with red eyes, and one contractor, Newell Partridge, said that when he aimed a flashlight at the creature in a nearby field, its eyes glowed like bicycle reflectors. Additionally, he blamed buzzing noises from his television set and the appearance of his German Shepherd dog on the creature, which is something, alright. There were, of course, skeptics to the creature's supposed supernatural origin. A biologist believed that the sightings could be attributed to a crane, and a local sheriff said that it could be a shite poke or an unusually large heron. Despite the skepticism and lack of hard evidence, the newspapers took the story and ran with it, naming the creature Mothman, likely influenced by the recent prevalence of Killer Moth, a villain in the Batman comics of the time. This was likely an attempt to grab attention, rather than attributing any similarities to the Moth-themed villain. While there were dozens of sightings of Mothman over the next year, like all sensationalist news stories, interest in the story of Mothman waned as its sightings did the same. This should have been the end of it. The legend of this unknown creature should have faded into faint memory had the accident not occurred. The following 15th of December 1967 was host to a tragedy that resulted in the deaths of 46 people. This tragedy was centered around the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The Silver Bridge, named for the color of its aluminum paint, was an I-bar chain suspension bridge built in 1928 that crossed the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant with Gallipoli, Ohio. An I-bar chain bridge is a form of suspension bridge where stacks of redundant connected I-bars, or bars with eye holes on the ends, which are connected to the central towers, hold up the chains supporting the deck of the bridge. Unlike most I-bar chain suspension bridges, the Silver Bridge was built from high-strength steel and forwent the multiple chains that a bridge made from mild steel would have had for its redundancy. Its designers trusting the stronger steel's higher tensile strength and designing with only a pair per section per side. It should have been fine were it not for two factors. One, the lack of redundancy means that a failure of a main part compromises the integrity of the entire bridge. And two, when the bridge was designed, the most common car was the Ford Model T, weighing only 1,500 pounds. By the 1960s, the average car weighed nearly 4,000 pounds, and the bridge was subjected to bumper-to-bumper traffic multiple times a day, 5 days a week, which caused unplanned stress on the bridge's elements. On December 15, 1967, that stress caught up with the Silver Bridge during rush hour, when a defect in a single link, the first link below the top of the Ohio Tower, known as I-bar 330, expanded. The defect was a small crack, a crack formed through wear at the bearing that grew through internal corrosion. The crack was only about 0.1 inches or 2.5 millimeters deep when the link failed during rush hour, breaking in a brittle fashion. When the lower side of the I-bar failed, all of the load was transferred to the other side of the I-bar, which unbalanced the bridge and caused a cascade failure, plunging dozens of cars and their occupants into the frigid waters of the Ohio River. Often freezing over in winter, the Ohio River was cold enough to dramatically lessen motor function in less than 5 minutes, with death from cold exposure and drowning in less than 15. For the 46 people who died, it was either the cold or the impact that sealed their fates. The bridge collapse was naturally investigated and became something of a cautionary tale for engineers of every kind. As a result of the thoroughness of the investigation, the cause of the disaster was precisely and indisputably found to be a design that inadvertently made inspection all but impossible and failure all but inevitable. According to engineering historian Henry Petrosky, if ever a design was to blame for a failure, this was it. While the catastrophe that claimed the lives of 46 people plunged the town into a profound state of mourning and shock, it was in the wake of this grim disaster that Mothman's association with ill omens took root, leaving many to believe that it was in fact a harbinger of impending calamity. People took note of the local supposed supernatural creature and the coincidental tragedy and inextricably linked the two. Howdy folks, we're about halfway through the video. If you've watched it this far, you're probably enjoying it, so why don't you consider subscribing? It means a lot and it really helps out the channel. Alright, let's get back into it. It's human nature to find and recognize patterns, even where none exist, and when Mothman's sightings stopped after the tragedy, an undeniable pattern formed in many's minds. And for believers, that pattern continued to appear. Over the next decades, sightings of Mothman began popping up all over the world. In April of 1968, workers around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant began experiencing a series of strange events revolving around the sightings of a mysterious creature described as a large, mutated man with huge wings and glowing red eyes. This creature, which many identified as Mothman, heralded the disastrous Chernobyl disaster the same month. According to a Georgian newspaper, in 1999, Mothman was sighted in Moscow shortly before the 1999 Russian apartment bombings. And during 2017, in Chicago, 55 people came forward to a self-described Fortean researcher, Lon Strickler, saying that they had seen Mothman in the Windy City. Although this data is fundamentally flawed because it is a selective sample of people who already believed in Mothman, rather than a random sampling of Chicagoan residents asking if they've seen Mothman. Still, these sightings could have presaged the 2017 flooding of parts of Chicago. The Mothman, it appeared, had assumed the role of a dark herald. presaging disaster and foretelling tragedy, and a cult of interest sprung up around it. In 2002, Point Pleasant held its first annual Mothman Festival. The Mothman Festival began as a creative way for people to visit Point Pleasant, but rapidly became a celebration of Mothman's uniqueness, significance to the town, and enduring legend. Attendance to the festival grew rapidly, but especially after unveiling the town's centerpiece, a cheeked-up, 12-foot-tall metallic statue of Mothman, hitting 10 to 12,000 attendants per year. Mothman also has a home online, with many social media sites becoming home to a fandom of sorts for the supernatural creature. Mothman's tag on Tumblr alone nearly has 12,000 followers, with people drawing art, writing stories, and cementing the funky little death omen into pop culture fame. But was this creature indeed a prophet of doom, a celestial messenger, or was there a simpler explanation, one of coincidence and confusion? Occam's razor states that among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected, or the simplest explanation is most likely true. Could Mothman have been a normal animal? A case of mistaken identity by panicked observers caught up in the excitement of it all. Perhaps the most common explanation for Mothman's appearance is one that was brought up at the time of its original sightings. In the original round of sightings, 2 volunteer firemen who saw it said it was a large bird with red eyes. Building on that, Mason County Sheriff George Johnson said he believed the sightings were due to an unusually large heron he called a shite poke. Wildlife biologist Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University told reporters that descriptions and sightings all fit the sandhill crane, a large American crane almost as tall as a man, with a 7-foot wingspan that featured circles of reddish coloring around the eyes. The main discrepancy is that cranes have very defined necks, and Mothman reportedly had none. Also, sandhill cranes aren't native to West Virginia, and the confusion and lack of familiarity could have resulted in the exaggeration in Mothman's story. The only problem with this was that Point Pleasant, West Virginia is about 70 to 100 miles outside of the sandhill crane's migration route. And while one could have been blown off course or lost, there may be a simpler answer, seeing as the reddish skin around the crane's eyes wouldn't glow as eyewitnesses reported, and that it could only fly about 25 miles per hour. So if the sandhill crane doesn't fit the bill, what does? The answer could be an owl. Let's look at one of the earliest descriptions of Mothman. Shining red eyes stared back at them from a body without an obvious head or neck. Owls have some of the most prominent eye shine in the animal kingdom, thanks to the size of their eyes and the number of blood vessels in size, and easily fit the description of unearthly glowing eyes. They also roost in abandoned buildings, like the ones in the TNT area near Point Pleasant. They also don't have an obvious head or neck, their heads fitting seamlessly into their bodies. Owls even fly silently thanks to the unique design of their wing feathers, which could have accounted for the strange flight reported for Mothman. And while owls top out at only around 40 to 50 miles per hour in flight, the discrepancy could easily be explained by a misjudgment of how fast things actually are, especially if the observers were scared by the owl's eerie screech. A local man even shot a huge pale owl not too long after the sightings, so they were certainly in the area. So an owl hits all of the main physical descriptors for Mothman except one: size. How do you go from a 2-foot owl to a 6-foot eldritch horror? Mothman is reportedly the size of, well, a man, and barred owls, the main suspect for Mothman's true nature, have a wingspan close to 4 feet and barely top out at below 2 feet in height. Luckily, Joe Nickel, a skeptic and paranormal hoax investigator, has an answer for that. Nickel lined a dark road with plywood cutouts of Mothman with bike reflectors for eyes and drove volunteers down it for an episode of the 2010 television show Monster Quest. None of the volunteers were able to correctly guess the size of the cutouts. According to Nichols, it's very hard to judge the size of something seen at night in an unknown distance, and if you misjudge how far away it is, you misjudge its height by the same proportion. Frightened people also tend to fixate on the object of their fear, causing it to loom larger in their memory. With this in mind, it's easy to see how an unexpected encounter with a barred owl could be a terrifying experience. Not only that, but a few cases of exaggeration in the story, as it's told and retold, could easily transform the simple owl into a 6-foot-tall demonic Mothman that we all know and love today. It seems almost too simple to be true. Of course, just because Occam's razor says that the simplest answer is most likely to be true, doesn't mean it's always true. But maybe one day you'll be walking through a distant wood, and an owl will lunge from the trees, eyes glowing in the light, sighs distorted by fear, and you'll understand what those couples in Point Pleasant felt. As much as I'd like to believe, I personally think that Mothman isn't real. He's a figment of collective imagination and exaggeration, compounded on by popular culture and storytelling. Maybe he's an owl, a crane, or some other animal we haven't realized yet. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a harbinger of doom out there, a creature so strange and reclusive that few have ever seen it. Maybe Mothman is real. But we can't know for sure until definitive proof is found. Is Mothman a real monster, or is the legend simply a case of mistaken identity? I'd love to hear what y'all think in the comments. Folks, I've been Speaker 4. This has been the Legend of Mothman. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see a video on another mystery, you can check out this video right here. If you want to help support the channel, you can subscribe, and I will catch you on the flip side. Later!